Sitting next to me are two cards from my collection that were amongst the most valuable. I have a Mana Crypt that yesterday morning was worth, I don't know, 300 bucks, and this Jeweled Lotus was worth 100. I had them both in a folder because I don't really play them. I played another copy of Jeweled Lotus in one of my decks, but that's pretty much all I got. And then suddenly there was a bunch of bad news that came out that said that these and two other cards are out of the Commander format, and it hit very suddenly and people did not expect it, generally speaking. I'm not talking about the decision to ban these today. I'm talking about everything else around it, which is the Rules Committee, the RC, and everything that has kind of been sparked from this conversation. Because while I'm only 2.5 years into Magic, and I think a lot of people could be like, well, Travis, you haven't played CEDH. Well, Travis, you haven't been in the space long enough. Oh, Travis, you don't have the historical context. I can talk a little bit about complex ecosystems where you have third parties working with game developers and publishers, and you've got a bunch of fans that care about that stuff, because I've spent 13 years in the esports ecosystem, specifically around League of Legends, and a lot of the stuff that I've seen pop up there makes me think a lot about the things that I see in the esports ecosystem. Namely, this whole RC situation, because what I have noticed is a pretty big conversation, even amongst friends of mine and other content creators, around this kind of like anti-RC sentiment, where people are like, oh, should they even control the bans list for Commander? Like, why are we having these guys do it? Shouldn't Wizards of the Coast do it? I find this conversation fucking crazy. Because one of the things that I have been so excited about Commander is the fact that you have a third party that is running this thing, and it is not all the power concentrated within the hands of a developer. People, for some reason, and it's so funny because people complain about Wizards of the Coast nonstop in the last 2.5 years I've been here. For some reason, everyone is suddenly forgetting that Wizards of the Coast has oftentimes a pretty adversarial relationship with its consumer. Like, you and Wizards of the Coast are adversaries. I think a lot of that comes in from Hasbro. That's what I like to give the company the benefit of the doubt and say that it's like the parent company that's doing all this stuff. But I've seen time and time again how frustrated the audience gets, the consumers get, whenever Wizards makes a decision that is at odds with its consumer. I come from the League of Legends space, and as much as people complain about Riot Games has this kind of like ethos of players first, right? And we can debate whether or not they do a good job of that, but that is something that they frequently try to do, is like, how can we do right by the consumer? I've never heard that in relation to Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast is like, all right, we did Festival in a Box. All right, that was a lot of value. It got sold out. Wait, how do we make it less valuable and charge more? They always find that maximum line efficiency of how much can we charge our customer. You know, how can we do draft boosters and set boosters and then make play boosters so that nobody can buy draft boosters? And we've just essentially raised the price of this thing dramatically over the course of a couple of years. Wizards is not your friend. You should be happy when there is power that they do not have that is taken out of their control. I've also seen some conversation around the idea both ways. It kind of goes both ways, where I've seen people angry at Wizards, even though this is a decision not made by Wizards, and I've seen some people claim that Wizards of the Coast has influenced the RC in order to do this stuff, and that it's, you know, oh, they couldn't do this unless the RC or unless Wizards let the RC do it. And then I've seen other people be like, oh, we should have Wizards stop the RC from ever being able to do these kind of bans. I find it hilarious that people are angry and they're going in both directions. But I really do firmly believe, having met a couple of the RC folks, none of whom I'd say like are close friends, but some of whom I've had really great interactions with. I guess all the ones I've talked to I've had great interactions with. These people do not strike me as like corporate shills or people who are conniving and scheming behind the scenes. I think they just legitimately really like Commander and are trying to figure out how to do good stuff about it. And have gotten a lot of flack in recent times from what I've seen for doing nothing about the format. There hasn't been bans in a while, so I just don't buy the fact that this is happening. So why do we think that the RC is good? As I talked about, Wizards of the Coast really wants to do everything they can to optimize for their own bottom line. They are not interested in you. There's been a lot of conversation with how much they have sort of abused Commander as a money-making format over the years. I have a box of Commander Masters here, and last year there was a huge outcry over the fact that this was like one of the most expensive boxes. I think this is the most expensive draft box they've ever done. correct me if I'm wrong, somebody out there, I'm sure you will, because that's what people do. But then they had the collector boxes that were only 4 packs and cost $200. Like, they will figure out how to bleed you dry on this stuff because they understand it is the most popular format. I do not think that you want that group to be the ones that are making these decisions. And I actually think that, I don't want to talk too much about the bannings at all, but the fact that both of these were flagship products in releases last year, while it burns consumers temporarily, I think the RC demonstrating like, hey, we will actually be down to ban some of the chase cards that you print, like Jeweled Lotus, which was printed entirely for Commander and was always meant to be a card that was going to be printed at as a way of driving a ton of cost and keeping it very high. I think the RC saying that they're down to ban something like this will hopefully prevent, or at least discourage, Wizards from creating incredibly high cost cards that can go in, or I shouldn't say high cost, that will prevent them from creating incredibly high priced cards that are just able to be run in virtually any deck just for the sake of like pumping up a release. So I think it's really good that the RC exists, and I understand why people are mad, because a lot of what I saw yesterday were very emotional reactions. Interestingly, I did not see very many reactions that were like, I really like playing Jeweled Lotus and I'm sad I can't play it anymore. The reactions that I mostly saw were people that were like, hey, this kills consumer confidence, or wow, the value of this is so bad, or oh, these artists who had like artist proofs, now that stuff is wasted for them and they've lost so much value, or like think of the LGSs, think of all these people. I don't want to diminish the financial implications that this has on individuals or on LGSs. You see 2 of these cards right now next to me. These were cards that I owned. I also got hit. I had 2 other Jeweled Lotuses, I think, Lotai, and I've just lost a ton of value in this one moment where they released this ban. And I know there are other people that got hit a lot harder. So I don't want to say that there are not drown sides to the stuff, or that people shouldn't feel emotional. I totally get it. But I do think that the main thing I want to discuss is why the RC needs to think about the stuff differently. Because I'm a believer in their need to exist. I think it is really good that they balance out Wizards a little bit as a third party that they cannot control. Maybe they have some sort of influence. I know that there's conversations that happen between the 2 of them, but for the most part, the RC can flip the middle finger to Wizards and decide to ban something that Wizards decides to print, like Nadu, by the way, which was also part of these brandings. So I think it's important that the RC exists, and I think it's important that they have trust from the community. I would say after yesterday, there's been a lot of trust from the community that has been lost in the RC. I think that you do not want a world where people are questioning whether or not the RC should exist, because the power of the RC and their legitimacy comes purely from the people. Not to get into too many political conversations here, right? But like, that's essentially what it is. Like, why does the RC exist? Because we will it. And if the people no longer want the RC to exist, then they will lose legitimacy, and other groups could come in, or Wizards could come in and just kind of push them out and make all these decisions on their own. I think that would be bad. So what should they do? Well, unfortunately, and I'm sad I never got to meet him in person in my limited time, but I've heard nothing but really great things about Sheldon Menery, who I know was one of the founders of Commander and also was the face of the RC and really kind of ran that whole show over there. He passed last year, and I think that in the interim, there has been no one on the RC that has kind of stepped into that role for him. I think that's unfortunate. I think you kind of need a commissioner of the league to be the person who will take a lot of the heat, but who can also go out there and talk about this stuff. These bannings were basically done as a notepad.txt file dropped onto a website. That is not good. Think about the fact that, I guess I would say, think about game designers and game design teams and game companies. Usually you have a couple people who will go out and they will explain their philosophy. Wizards has this great, right, where they've got Rosewater doing his podcast, you got Gavin doing conversations every time a set releases or Commander stuff happens. Especially, I really like the way that he handles the Pauper stuff around the BNR updates in Pauper. There's not you. I think it's really hard to run a game in 2024 and not have somebody who can come out and discuss balanced decisions, which is essentially what the RC is doing, right? It's an interesting situation where WotC's designing and the RC is balancing, but they need to have somebody who can come out and talk about this stuff, preferably not in a notepad file. So I think that if I was, I'm not, and I'm not, there are probably some decisions behind the scenes that I'm not newbie about, but I would, if I was advising the RC as a person who is very familiar with covering communications to communities, I would have suggested that one, they do a better job of telegraphing these decisions. I know that I'm new to the scene, but I know there's a lot of conversation sometimes about having like a watch list, or you tend to have wizards sometimes come out and say like, hey, we're keeping an eye on these things. We have an update. I think a lot of people were not surprised, for instance, that Fury was banned whenever it got hit, or later on when Nadu got banned, because a lot of these things had been kind of telegraphed from the start. And so having people not wake up to the shock of suddenly losing hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in value of their collection, and or having to rebuild some of their decks, these types of things, I think that it would be really good if this was not like a shock when it hit. Two, I think you need to have video conversations around this type of stuff. You need to do either a panel or a single individual or a series of interviews that all release under embargo at the same time around the philosophy of why you're making these decisions. And they need to work within the context that you will have hopefully set in previous interviews and videos where, hey, what are we looking for in Magic? Well, maybe in Commander specifically, we feel the format is speeding up too fast. We worry that fast mana is a situation that allows the existing issues of the format speeding up too fast to get exacerbated. And so what we're going to do is instead, we are going to look at fast mana and decide what are the biggest problem childs in that. Maybe you want to talk about accessibility of the format, and you want to decide that like, hey, we don't like that these things are so expensive and that Wizards is refusing to reprint them at a rate at which allows them to do that. I think it's hard for the RC to come out and say that, but you can say that in kind of casual ways. And by the way, that might resonate with a lot of the audience who are frustrated with the cost of Magic the Gathering. So I would say just more video content, hopefully video content beforehand, discussing sort of your existence, why you exist, what you're looking to accomplish in the space, and all that type of stuff. I know there's some written content around that stuff, but based off of what I saw yesterday in the reaction, there's a lot of people that don't understand like even what the RC is, how they function, why they're doing this type of thing. You can't just have it be a text page thing. And when you do discuss bannings, you need to come at it from a place of empathy, right? Hey, we are so sad. This was a really tough decision. We understand people are going to be in really rough states. We wish there was a way to solve this in a different way. But ultimately, we understand that, or we feel as though we have to make unfortunate decisions that will affect people for the health of the format. And so I think that would be really good. One of the best explanations I saw for why some of these cards should be banned came from Rebel, who some of you may know is a content creator on YouTube. You can go check her out. She did a video that was like, said something like, these cards didn't need to be banned. Typical YouTube, like, I think she said banning these cards was a mistake. And you would think that it was just like part of the giant parade of outrage that we saw yesterday. But in it, she talked about cards that she thought should be banned and cards that she thought shouldn't be banned. And I thought that was really smart. And the way she did it was by discussing a theory that she has about kind of mana acceleration. I'm forgetting the exact term that she used, but I watched it late last night. And I thought it was so thoughtful and logical. And it did a good job of, at least, even if you disagreed with her, because I disagreed with her on some of it, you understood sort of the logic and philosophy of it. My concern is that after yesterday, people are going to think that the rules committee are these faceless gods that exist on the mountain, come down, decree something with very little context on it, and then go back up, and you just have to live in fear of them. You know, that's what all these people are like, I'm selling my collection. I'm getting out of Magic. I'm just going to proxy everything. I'm never buying another card again for Wizards of the Coast. They're doing that because they fear the whims of these gods that they have no connection to and no understanding of, that can come in and have dramatic impacts on their life without any logical reason and rhyme from their perspective. So I think it's important that they come in and they solve that stuff. You need to restore trust in the RC, and you need to set forth a path for you to make controversial decisions in the future, minimize damage and risk. Because if the RC can't do that, I think we all lose, because it is important for a third party to control this stuff. And I think any kind of system or group or party or entity that can balance out the incredible strength of a game developer that can design a game that people are already invested in, sometimes for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, I think that's a good thing. So I hope they continue to exist. I'm sad that these are now not worth much, but that's the way it goes.